A frozen January morning in South Carolina cattle country, and somewhere in the pre-dawn dark, 800 British soldiers are marching through mud on empty stomachs, chasing a ragged collection of farmers and frontiersmen they fully expect to scatter before breakfast. Their commander is arrogant, their troops are exhausted, and every single tactical advantage belongs to the professionals in red coats. In roughly 90 minutes, every one of those assumptions will be surgically dismantled by one man who built a battle plan around the specific ways that ordinary people fail under pressure. 1. By January 1781, the British military believed the American South was already a conquered territory, its rebellion essentially finished and its resistance crumbling to ash. They had seized Charleston in 1780, crushed Continental forces at Camden, and watched the Southern Army dissolve into a retreating shadow of itself. British strategy demanded sweeping up the remaining rebels, pacifying the backcountry, and shifting attention northward. Nobody in London was entertaining the possibility that a cattle field in rural South Carolina was about to rearrange the WAR's trajectory. 2. When George Washington needed someone to resurrect the shattered Southern Continental Army, he chose Nathaniel Greene, a self-taught military theorist who had never won a major battle in his career. Greene was a Quaker from Rhode Island who taught himself strategy by devouring military texts while running his family's iron forge. Washington bypassed more decorated candidates and selected a man whose defining qualification was managing defeats without collapsing beneath their weight. It's equivalent to hiring a chess theorist to coach a football team already down by 30 points. 3. Greene arrived in the South and immediately made a decision that every 18th century military textbook would stamp as suicidal. He split his already outnumbered, under-equipped army into two separate wings operating across different territories simultaneously. Military doctrine demanded concentrating weakened forces against a superior enemy and never dividing them under any circumstances. Greene's logic was counterintuitively precise. Two mobile forces could feed themselves from separate regions and force the British to divide their own pursuit accordingly. He converted the army's greatest liability into the mechanism of its survival. 4. Daniel Morgan commanded the detached American wing and carried a specific grievance against British authority etched into his scarred back. During the French and Indian War, a British officer ordered Morgan lashed for striking a redcoat who had insulted him, and he received 500 strokes of the whip, a punishment typically lethal at half that number. Morgan survived, emerged scarred, and spent 2 decades becoming one of the most instinctively lethal battlefield tacticians the 18th century would accidentally produce. He had excellent personal reasons to want this fight. 5. Morgan's most dangerous weapon wasn't tactical genius, but something military academies struggle to teach: genuine empathy for the psychology of frightened men under fire. He understood from personal experience that untrained militia would break under a bayonet charge, not from lack of courage, but because bayonets trigger a biological flight response that no speechmaking can override at the crucial instant. Instead of demanding the impossible, Morgan designed the entire battle around what his militia would naturally do when terrified. He built his victory from human weakness, not in spite of it. 6. On the British side, Master Tarleton commanded the pursuing force with a self-assurance reinforced by a string of devastating Southern victories. He was 26, a cavalry officer of spectacular aggression, notorious across the Carolinas for his unit's massacre of surrendering Americans at the Waxhaws in May 1780, an atrocity that earned him the permanent nickname Bloody Bon. His reputation for relentless, savage pursuit was simultaneously his greatest military asset and the psychological tripwire Morgan had already identified and planned around. Vanity, it turns out, is an operational tactical vulnerability. 7. Morgan chose a broad, open cattle pasture called the Cowpens as his battlefield, a decision that continues prompting arguments among military historians examining his logic. Classical doctrine demanded terrain offering natural barriers protecting your flanks and a clear withdrawal route to the rear. Cowpens had neither. It was flat, treeless ground where cavalry could move unobstructed in every direction. Morgan selected it precisely because that openness gave Tarleton's superior cavalry no topographical advantage, while giving his layered formation room to execute each deliberate step. Chosen weakness, functioning as disguised strength. 8. Morgan positioned his force with the Broad River directly at its back, an arrangement every military manual would classify as catastrophically dangerous for an outnumbered force facing professional cavalry. A trapped formation with no escape route cannot retreat, and soldiers attempting to cross a fast-moving river under pursuit become a massacre rather than a withdrawal. Morgan understood this perfectly, and that was precisely the point. By eliminating the option to run, he removed his militia's most tempting crisis response and replaced it with one irreversible choice: fight or drown. 9. Morgan deployed his forces in 3 distinct lines separated by roughly 150 yards, a formation bearing no resemblance to conventional 18th century linear doctrine. Standard European warfare demanded tight shoulder-to-shoulder lines firing coordinated volleys and physically holding ground under bayonet pressure. Morgan's layered design assigned each line a different psychological task, and crucially, every man knew exactly what he was expected to accomplish and precisely when to stop. The entire structure was built not around idealized soldier behavior, but around accurately predicted human failure modes. 10. The first line consisted of approximately 150 selected riflemen whose sole tactical objective was targeting British officers and sergeants at the front of the advancing formation. Morgan's reasoning was coldly precise. A professional army whose command structure gets dismantled from the front loses its capacity to coordinate coherent responses to unexpected developments. Every rifleman understood that shooting the man wearing epaulets mattered far more than hitting the anonymous soldier beside him. It was targeted assassination, dressed in the polite language of tactical doctrine, and it worked. 11. The second line held Morgan's 300 militia, the least experienced, most psychologically fragile element of the entire force. Instead of the standard hold this line or die order, Morgan gave them something unprecedented: explicit, guilt-free permission to retreat after firing exactly 2 disciplined volleys. He personally walked among them the night before, explaining each man's role and promising that retreating on command wasn't cowardice but the plan itself, deliberately designed and fully intended from the start. He handed frightened men an assignment they could complete without shame, and that distinction made everything possible. 12. The third line consisted of 450 Continental Regulars and veteran militia commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Eager Howard, the professional backbone of the entire formation. These were trained soldiers who had survived multiple campaigns, could execute bayonet charges under fire, and understood complex repositioning under real combat pressure. Their assignment was singular: hold the line absolutely, no matter what chaos erupted around them, serving as the immovable anvil against which Tarleton's hammer would eventually strike. Everything Morgan had designed upstream depended entirely on this line not breaking. 13. Hidden behind a second hill, invisible to Tarleton's advancing formation, waited the most decisive element of Morgan's trap: roughly 80 dragoons and 45 mounted militia under Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, a distant cousin of the commander-in-chief. This concealed force had one assignment: remain invisible until the precise moment when the British were most committed, most exposed, and least capable of coherent defensive response. Morgan wasn't merely setting a trap, he was engineering a nested ambush inside another ambush, designed by someone who had already mentally completed the battle before it started. 14. Tarleton received intelligence that Morgan was at the Cowpens and responded the way men intoxicated by unbroken reputations always respond: immediately and without deliberation. He ordered his roughly 1,100 troops to break camp at 3 in the morning, march 8 miles through pitch darkness on empty stomachs, with no sleep, no food, and no reconnaissance of the position awaiting them. He brought exhausted men to fight a rested enemy and detected no contradiction in that arrangement. Confidence seasoned by consecutive victories becomes indistinguishable from catastrophic blindness. 15. As the British advanced in parade ground formation at dawn on January 17, 1781, the 1st American riflemen opened fire from roughly 150 yards, a range exceeding what smoothbore muskets could realistically reach. Officers began falling in disproportionate numbers, punching demoralizing gaps through the command structure of the advancing formation, exactly as Morgan had designed. Tarleton's professionals were being systematically bled before reaching the 1st American position. The trap had already begun closing, and nobody on the British side had noticed anything unusual yet. 16. The militia delivered their 2 volleys and did exactly what Morgan had told them. They turned and retreated in a controlled arc around the left flank of the 3rd American line. To Tarleton's battle-maddened troops, conditioned by repeated Southern engagements to read any American withdrawal as total collapse, this looked like the familiar, beautiful beginning of another rout. The British formation fractured its own discipline at that moment, abandoning coordinated advance to sprint forward in pursuit, walking directly into the kill zone Morgan had constructed for precisely this purpose. 17. Tarleton's charging troops crested the rise expecting to finish off a broken enemy, and ran headlong into 450 rested Continental regulars standing in perfect formation with bayonets fixed. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic for the British advance. Men sprinting forward in premature celebration suddenly collided with a prepared defensive wall that had not appeared anywhere in their picture of how the battle was supposed to unfold. Howard's regulars delivered close-range volleys, sending the first British wave staggering backward into the confused mass immediately behind it. 18. As the third line absorbed the British charge, the retreating militia completed their arc around the American left flank, reformed into a firing line, and marched back into the battle from the opposite direction. Something Tarleton's troops had never seen an American force execute under real combat conditions anywhere during the Southern campaign. Militia were expected to scatter and disappear once they broke from the field. Morgan had converted his most predictable tactical liability into the battle's most lethal and disorienting surprise. 19. At the moment of maximum British confusion, William Washington unleashed his hidden cavalry from behind the hill, driving into the exposed British right flank and completing what military theorists call a double envelopment. The same maneuver Hannibal used to annihilate a Roman army at Cannae in 216 BC. Simultaneously struck from the front, compressed from the left by returning militia, and now hammered on the right by cavalry, the British formation had no coherent defensive option remaining on any side. The trap had closed completely. 20. As his infantry collapsed around him, Tarleton attempted one final act of bravery, rallying his reserve cavalry for a desperate charge to punch through the American encirclement. He personally rode forward and called on his dragoons, and they flatly refused to move. Veteran cavalry troops watching an army disintegrate after an 8-mile pre-dawn march on empty stomachs calculated their odds independently and declined their commanding officer's direct invitation to die for a battle already irreversibly lost. Tarleton had finally met the one enemy his reputation couldn't intimidate: rational self-preservation. 21. The battle lasted approximately 60 minutes from first shot to British surrender, and the numbers remained staggering by any military standard. Tarleton's force of roughly 1,100 men suffered over 300 killed or wounded and nearly 600 captured, representing a loss rate of approximately 86% in a single engagement. The American force suffered 12 killed and 60 wounded combined. Morgan had achieved near-total battlefield annihilation, using militia he had personally persuaded not to flee, against professionals commanded by a man who had assumed they inevitably would. 22. The Cowpens didn't merely destroy Tarleton's force, it psychologically shattered Lord Cornwallis, the British commanding general of the entire Southern campaign, in ways he never recovered from operationally. Enraged, Cornwallis burned his own supply wagons to accelerate pursuit of Greene's Continentals northward through the Carolinas, trading operational sustainability for emotional revenge. That pursuit became a grinding, months-long strategic bleed that exhausted the British Southern Army without delivering a decisive engagement, leaving Cornwallis's forces depleted enough that their surrender at Yorktown in October 1781 became structurally inevitable rather than merely unfortunate.